Let us pray. O Lord, grant us a daily awareness of the precious gift of life which you have given us. As members of this legislative assembly, we dedicate our lives anew to the service of our province and our country. Amen.
Introduction of visitors.
Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to introduce to you today, and through you to members of the Assembly, a distinguished visitor who is seated in your gallery. We are pleased today to welcome on his first official visit to Alberta, His Excellency Bernard Twale, who is the High Commissioner of Malawi. Will the honourable members please welcome him to the Assembly?
Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills.
Calgary North Hill.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to introduce Bill number PR 7, Calgary Beautification Foundation Amendment Act 1987. The purpose of this bill is to make changes in the function of the foundation relating to the constitution of the board and the functioning of the foundation.
The honourable member for Calgary North Hill has moved for first reading Bill number PR 7, Calgary Beautification Foundation Amendment Act 1987. Those members wishing to give assent to first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. So ordered.
Bill PR 7, being Calgary Beautification Foundation Amendment Act 1987, introduced by Honourable Member Mr. Stewart, is now read a first time. Tabling returns and reports.
To file 3 copies of the Official Opposition Task Force report on the family farm and the future of rural Alberta.
Annual report for the Forestry, Lands and Wildlife for the years 1985-86.
Special guests.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to introduce 50 students from 2 schools. One is the Avalon School in the constituency of Edmonton Park Island, and the other guests are from Baie-Comeau, Quebec. I'd like to give them a special welcome to the Assembly, and hope that the visit is very enjoyable. And I think, Mr. Speaker, I'm entitled at this time to say in respect to Avalon School that 5 of my children attended there, and it is a great school with a French language program, and I would like to introduce the 4 teachers as well. Mr. Law Johnson, Mr. Roger LeBlanc, Ms. Mary Ellen Boulou, and Ms. Jasmine Michon. I would ask that the students and the teachers stand and receive the welcome of the Assembly.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
No, sorry. Member for Calgary Foothills.
Mr. Speaker, if we may revert to introductions. It is my pleasure to introduce 88 students from grades 7 to 9 of F.E. Osborne Junior High School. These students, of course, are in the riding of Calgary Northwest, and they are visiting the legislature today accompanied by 4 teachers, Mr. Hanson, Mr. Hiruma, Mr. Sumner, Mrs. Jones, and 3 parents, Mrs. Wise, Mrs. Clark, and Mrs. Beveridge. May I ask the Assembly to join me in giving them a warm welcome, and would they please rise?
Now a question period.
Sure. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct the first question to the Minister of Agriculture. Mr. Speaker, last week the federal Tories announced a major reduction in initial grain prices. I believe 15% for wheat, 25% for feed barley, and 32% for malting barley. In view of the already disastrous economic situation for grain farmers, what new financial aid program will the government be announcing this session? And I stress, what new aid program this session?
Mr. Speaker, all members, I'm sure, would endorse our hope that we would see grain prices elevated in the international market, and we are delighted that the federal government has given such a high priority to bringing agriculture to the international scene with the hopes of removing subsidies both in the European Economic Community and in the United States. If the honourable member would like me to go through with him the initiatives that we have announced that are new this session, we just recently signed a tripartite sugar beet agreement for southern Alberta sugar beet producers. We continued on with our feed grain market adjustment program. We just announced Farming for the Future additional funding. We come forward with a farm credit stability program in the last session, Mr. Speaker. We've got an Ag Research Institute piece of legislation before this House, and I can go on quite a lengthy list as it relates to the agricultural sector within this province. But even with that list, Mr. Speaker, we're not happy, and we're going to continue to work with the federal government and pursue very actively our hope that there will be an additional payout under some type of a special grains program in the next crop year, acknowledging the difficulties that the agricultural sector is facing, especially within the grain sector.
Well, supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. It's all very well and dandy, but my question is, what is this government going to do that's new in this session? That's what the farmers of Alberta want to know. Rather than listing all the things that have happened in the past that aren't working, what are you going to do now in view of these disastrous prices?
Mr. Speaker, I want to temper my remarks, acknowledging what is taking place here, but I must shake my head in amazement again, because one only has to look at what the New Democratic Party does in Manitoba as compared to what our party does in Alberta. And I think it's shameful of what support the Manitoba government offers the agricultural sector. They're the lowest of any province in Canada. And this, here we're hearing again the same hypocrisy that we have on a consistent basis from the New Democratic Party. We have shown by our action and our consistent support of the agricultural sector that we are going to make sure that it remains viable and strong within the province of Alberta. And in the event that additional aid is required, as we have done in the past, this government will be very forthcoming in its support for the agricultural sector.
You know, the minister can be chippy and yell and scream all he likes. What the people want to know in Alberta is, what's this government going to do? And that's the question I'm trying to ask. Now, my question is specifically, will the government, there's supposed to be $260 million approximately in aid which is coming to Alberta producers under the Special Canadian Grains Program. And able to put pressure on the federal government, would the Alberta government at least match that $260 million to help out our grain producers?
Mr. Speaker, as the honourable member should be aware, there are going to be substantial checks coming, not only under the Special Grains Program, but also under the Western Grain Stabilization Act. which was announced by Charlie Mayer when he indicated that there would be decreased initial prices as it relates to the grains. If the honourable member is not aware of the exact payouts, we're more than happy to forward him the information. Mr. Speaker, as I indicated earlier, we are going to continue to work with the federal government and continue with our strong support for the agricultural sector, and I don't think anything speaks louder than our record. Mr. Speaker, if one looks at a per capita basis as to the support that this government has given to the agricultural sector, we do more so than any other province in Canada. But we acknowledge, and I say this with sincerity, and I hope the honourable member didn't think I was hollering and shouting, because I wasn't hollering and shouting. I didn't think he was in the position of the honourable member for Westlock Sturgeon, whereby he needed a hearing aid yet. But I should point out to him, we're going to continue with our support. We acknowledge, and I say this with all sincerity, the serious difficulty that the agricultural sector is going through, and we are, because of that, going to continue with the strong support that has been forthcoming in the past.
That's, Mr. Speaker, talk is cheap. We're looking for action. That's what I was trying to determine, what new initiatives. But one thing this government could do, in view of these latest statistics on initial prices, will the government now at least abandon the 23 cents per gallon hike in farm fuel costs due to come into effect on June the 1st? 36 million, will you at least do that?
Mr. Speaker, talk is cheap, and that's why one should look at the figures. In Manitoba, the New Democratic Party supports their agricultural sector the smallest amount. And the only reason I stress that is so that people recognize it's easy to say one thing, but to deliver is another. And we've delivered with our support in close to $500 million within this budget that was just introduced. Mr. Speaker, we maintain, no matter how the opposition tries to twist it with their deceit, we've maintained a 14-cent differential which the farmer does enjoy. And unlike the honourable member, we don't indicate to others that costs are not going to go up, because in their own document they advocated a 6-cent increase in fuel tax. He didn't say that. He didn't say that to the gravel producers when he spoke to them. He indicated to the gravel producers he wanted to see us reduce that 5 cents when he himself had advocated a 6-cent increase for them. That's the hypocrisy, Mr. Speaker, from that side.
Westlock Sturgeon.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, my supplemental also to the man that's in charge of spreading gravel around, but I would like to ask the Minister, Mr. Speaker, in view of the fact that all he can suggest is federal cures and federal's going to do this or that, or what went on in Manitoba, what will he do about something he can do himself? And that is call off his dogs in the Agricultural Development Corporation that are foreclosing on farmers, that are going out after them. Why won't he call off their dogs and give them at least a year moratorium before putting a noose around so many farmers' necks?
Mr. Speaker, as the honourable member for Westlock Sturgeon is aware, we have just recently conducted a very extensive review on the Agricultural Development Corporation. We're looking forward to reviewing those recommendations with the honourable member and all members of this Legislative Assembly when we do receive the final report. It would be very unwise and very unfair of us to prejudge a report after we've commissioned the excellent work to be done. Once we do have that report, we will be in a better position to assess it.
Overbar.
Mr. Speaker, to the Honourable Minister, would the Honourable Minister consider an interim moratorium on foreclosures with the Agricultural Development Corporation pending the report coming before the Minister and this Assembly?
Mr. Speaker, what we have done is we have both within our department individuals who are willing to work with farmers who are having financial difficulties, plus within the Agricultural Development Corporation we have enterprise councillors that are more than happy to work with any farmers that are having financial difficulties. We do have real hesitation with placing a moratorium on it. It's something that we are willing to examine once we have the report of the ADC, but we first wish to see the recommendations of this select group of people who are going to come forward with excellent recommendations, I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, as to what we should do to make sure that our credit responsibilities to the agricultural sector are that much more responsive.
Cypress Radcliffe.
Question, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister regarding the special grains policy.
I wonder if the minister could inform the Assembly with the time that he spent with the minister responsible for the Wheat Board, Charlie Mayer, if he received any assurances of correcting the inaccuracies between irrigation crops, payout on irrigation crops, and those of dry land.
Mr. Speaker, when we met in Ottawa on the 30th of, it was quite some time ago,
March.
30th of March, with the agricultural ministers from across Canada and the federal ministers, the federal people did give us the assurance that they were going to take into account the differences as it relates to the irrigated and the dry land areas in southern Alberta. I have not seen any of the details as to how they are going to take that into account, but we have received the assurances from our federal counterparts that they are going to take it into account because of the strong representations that were made by individual members of this chamber and the commodity groups in southern Alberta.
Second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to direct the second question to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, the member for Calgary-Fish Creek has announced that in addition to his duties as an MLA, he wants to pursue a very heavy responsibility as the PR director for the 1988 Winter Olympics. In view of the controversy regarding this situation, will the Premier clear up whether he has met with the member and whether he has given his approval for this arrangement?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member, Mr. Payne, has met with me. We discussed the matter, and I believe that he will make an outstanding contribution to the Olympic organization and continue to do an outstanding job as an MLA.
Very interesting answer, Mr. Speaker. One has to assume that the responsibilities of a general manager of media for the Olympic Games carries a heavy responsibility and workload. Otherwise, why would they pay $70,000 for it? My question to the Premier, how can the member for Fish Creek adequately represent his constituents, carry on his responsibilities in this Assembly, represent the government on various committees while he manages all the media relations for the Olympics? Is he Superman, Mr. Premier?
Ask Mr. Strong.
Mr. Speaker, as I said earlier, I believe the honourable member will make an outstanding contribution to the Olympic organization. I think it will put additional pressures on him to fulfill his other responsibilities, but I'm confident that he can.
Speaker, I wonder if an MLA is only a part-time job, why this government just increased the wages by 10% with that type of attitude. My question to the Premier, the provincial government is a major funding of the Olympics. Does the Premier not see the potential for conflict of interest in having a member of his government as the PR director of the Calgary Olympics?
No, Mr. Speaker.
It's precisely the answer, the apathetic answer I expect from this Premier on something as serious as this. Typical head-in-the-sand approach, Mr. Speaker. My question is, why the Premier ever agreed to this, I'll never know. But in view of the fact that this controversy is hurting the credibility of the Olympic Games, will the Premier now ask, do the right thing, and now ask the member from Fish Creek to either resign from the House or from his job as the PR director of the 1988 Winter Olympics?
Mr. Speaker, I find that one of the most foolish things I've heard from the Leader of the Opposition in some time.
That's normal.
Supplementary, Westlock Sturgeon.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier. I don't think the question, Mr. Premier, is whether he'll do a good job for the Olympics. It's whether he will do a good job for his constituents. Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Premier, would you give us any idea? Is this going to be a pattern? In other words, do you think that any MLA in your backbench can take a full-time job and not take away from the work he is supposed to be doing for his constituents and for your party?
Mr. Speaker, it's completely a matter of opinion, and I'm unable to comment on such a general basis. I know we have full-time farmers in this legislature. I understand we have full-time union members. There may be even full-time. There may be a full-time dentists in the legislature, full-time doctors. There's full-time cabinet ministers who are also MLAs.
Supplementary. Supplementary, Clover Bard, filling the gap.
Mr. Speaker, to the Honourable Premier, is the Premier in a position to indicate if the Honourable Member is being offered the position to act as a liaison between the Olympic Committee and the provincial government?
He is not, Mr. Speaker.
Main question, Westlock Sturgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is to the Premier. It's a question, Mr. Speaker, involving last summer at the annual Premiers Conference. The Premiers unanimously endorsed the Edmonton Declaration, which is called, which pledged that Quebec's constitutional concerns would be addressed by the First Ministers before Senate reform. Now, over the last few weeks, Mr. Speaker, the Premier has stated that he would like to see Senate reform discussed, yet has met with criticism from External Affairs Minister Joe Clark for stating an opinion which is shared by all parties in this House that Senate reform is necessary now. Now, to the Premier, do you now agree that entering into the Edmonton Declaration, which put Quebec first and left Senate reform as an afterthought, was a mistake?
No, Mr. Speaker.
There are none so blind as those that will not see, Mr. Speaker. Is the Premier essentially now then disavowing the Edmonton Declaration then? I know he's not a lawyer, but how does he get down on both sides of this question?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member perhaps noticed that many other governments, including the Prime Minister, asked us to amend the Constitution just over a month ago on Native matters.
Perhaps, Mr. Speaker, then the Premier could tell us how he plans to convince the other premiers who feel that they signed the Edmonton Declaration meant something. How is he going to convince them to put reform of the Senate on the table at the same time as the Quebec problem is?
We'll just have to see how it turns out, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Premier, we've heard about gravel. When people ask about grain prices, we now somebody flying the seat of his pants going into one of the most important conferences known since Confederation. Well, as the Premier attempted to get the other provinces on side in pushing Senate reform and agenda along with Quebec's, and can he count on the support of any provinces? Could the Premier share with us any province that shares his opinion of walking in there and that the Edmonton Declaration meant nothing?
Well, Mr. Speaker, nobody said the Edmonton Declaration meant nothing. I don't speak for the other premiers, and I don't try to in this legislature. Over the coming days and weeks, we'll hear from them themselves, and I think that's the proper way to handle the meeting.
Member for Clover Bar.
Mr. Speaker, my question is the Honourable Minister of Agriculture and has to do with the Western Grain Stabilization Program. In light of the fact, Mr. Minister, that with the recent payout of $705 million, that the fund is about $850 million in a deficit position, can the Minister indicate if he's had any discussion as to find out what effect it's going to have on the farmers' premiums for the stabilization program as of this year?
Mr. Speaker, when we recently went to Tabor with the minister responsible for the Canadian Wheat Board to sign what we consider a very important document, a tripartite agreement for the sugar beet producers, he indicated to us that they were presently examining as to what they were going to do to make up that deficit shortfall. He said not to preclude the possibility whereby the federal government itself might take up that deficit. There was also the possibility whereby there might be increased premiums for the farming population, but they are presently examining what they should do with the huge deficit, as the honourable member for Clover Bar just pointed out.
Mr. Speaker, to the Honourable Minister, supplementary. The next Agricultural Ministers' meeting is slated for July in Quebec City. Would the Minister consider offering a proposal that the funds that come from these stabilization programs and the special grains programs be tax exempted as income?
Mr. Speaker, I'd be more than happy to examine that proposal. As the honourable member is aware, though, that would come under federal jurisdiction, and we'd be more than happy to make that representation. I should share with the chamber also and with the honourable member, it was some weeks ago that we tabled in this Legislative Assembly a telegram that we had sent to the minister responsible for the Canadian Wheat Board, suggesting continued strong support for our grain sector during this difficult period of time. I'm sure that support will be forthcoming, and at least it is my strong hope and desire that we will continue at the federal level with their strong support, because it is a national program. We do more so than any other province in Canada, and we're going to continue with that strong support. But we recognize that it is a national program, and we would hope that they would continue with their forthcoming support as they have in the past.
Mr. Speaker, to the Honourable Provincial Treasurer, in light of the fact that there's an 18% drop in initial prices announced last week, would the Provincial Treasurer now consider strongly dropping the 5 cents per litre gas tax on the agricultural sector?
No, Mr. Speaker.
Because inadvertently, I'm sure the honourable member misled the House. There is no 5-cent tax on the farming population. In the budget speech, the provincial treasurer indicated in a very forthright manner that they were going to be exempt from that tax, even though the farm fuel allowance was going to be reduced 5 cents. But I don't want, on a technicality, it's only fair that it be noted that that 14-cent differential is going to be maintained, even though the farm fuels are going to cost an additional 5 cents on June the 1st.
The member for Vegreville, followed by Vermilion Viking.
Supplementary question on the Western Grain Stabilization Program. I'm wondering what consideration the minister has given to a built-in problem with the program in that it's based on a 5-year average of prices which have been low over the last period of time. We're going to end up institutionalizing a low base price for the Grain Stabilization Program. I'm wondering what we can do to address that.
Mr. Speaker, and I'm glad the honourable member has brought that to light, because a lot of individual farmers are unaware that that is the circumstance whereby now, with the grain prices being decreased, the 5-year average automatically is going to be decreased, and it is a concern. That is why we are happy with a number of the recommendations that were included in our hail and crop report that we are presently examining too, and does require concurrence from the federal government, whereby there will be an actual revenue or cost of production insurance in place for agricultural sector to offset some of the difficulties that the honourable member just raised.
Vermilion Viking.
Could you indicate, with $1 billion going in on deficiency payment, $1 billion on stabilization, the farm fuel, millions that have gone in there, plus the farm fertilizer, could you indicate how much per acre that has added up to on a total seeded acre basis?
Mr. Speaker, I don't have those figures at my fingertips, but we'd be more than happy to put them together for the honourable member. I can leave him, though, with the assurance that our farmers within the province of Alberta have preferential treatment as compared to any other farmers throughout this country, in view of the strong support of this provincial government for the agricultural sector.
Westlock Sturgeon, final supplementary.
Speaker, with questions like that, I can see why the Premier says that they can take full-time jobs somewhere else. Supplementary to the Minister, Mr. Speaker. On the grain stabilization program, as has evidently already been pointed out by the questions, is based on certain grains and a 5-year rearward average, which the prices haven't been too good. Has the Minister thought further about coming forward with either a negative income tax system or a basic annual income for farmers to get around all the fancy schemes that we're now talking about that aren't working?
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to answer the question to the honourable member for Westlock Sturgeon for the 18th time and indicate to him that we have a threefold approach as it relates to the agricultural sector. One, we're going to do our level best to establish a safety net through insurance or stabilization programs, of which the hail and crop insurance report plays an integral role. We're doing our level best to reduce input costs, acknowledging that on the international market we haven't got a great deal of influence to indicate what prices our agricultural sector is going to receive for their commodities, but we are playing a significant role in reducing input costs. And thirdly, we're placing an added emphasis to make sure that we do have homes whereby we can sell our agricultural products both to the U.S. and to the Pacific Rim, Mr. Speaker, and we are very aggressively pursuing those trade initiatives, especially as it relates to our greatest trading partner, the United States.
Member for Calgary-Glenmore, followed by the member for Edmonton-Calder.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Economic Development and Trade, earlier this month the Minister announced that the province would be providing support to the Alberta's fashion industry, and at that time you mentioned a new program to promote Alberta's fashion. Can the Minister outline the details of this program?
Mr. Speaker, we've been working with the fashion industry for a number of months because it has become an important aspect of our diversification initiatives in strengthening other sectors of the Alberta economy. The initiative involved three facets, Mr. Speaker, as a result of cooperation and agreement with the industry. The development of a fashion video, which has been very well received, the development and production of a fashion directory, and also participation with the designers and manufacturers.
More order in the House.
And with the cooperation of the fashion industry and the designers and manufacturers, representations at the Fashion Festival in Toronto that concluded yesterday.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, this weekend I had the opportunity to attend the Festival of Canadian Fashions in Toronto, and I observed that Alberta had a fantastic booth at a substantial cost to the taxpayers. Can the Minister provide us with information that will substantiate the expense of this booth at that trade show?
Mr. Speaker, yes, the initiatives that I just outlined involving the three facets, that is the fashion video and the fashion directory, as well as participation in the fashion festival. The reports that I've received, and I'd like to congratulate the honourable member for being there and representing Alberta and the industry. Alberta manufacturers and designers were very well received, and the initial reports that we've been advised of is that they were busy in terms of receiving orders and inquiries from buyers from all over the world.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, I had the opportunity to meet these manufacturers and designers, and they did receive a lot of contracts, but now they are concerned about the follow-up plan for the Alberta government, if you have any further plans or additional programs for them to look forward to for assistance in this trade.
Mr. Speaker, in working with these entrepreneurs who are finding different aspects of opportunity in Alberta and are doing it aggressively and are seeking out markets for Alberta products and are putting to work Alberta ingenuity, one of the difficulties that they face is when they receive more orders than that they have been accustomed to, they have difficulty in financing that activity. And we think that it's a problem that is a good one rather than not having enough orders. So we'll be working with the industry using some of our existing programs, such as our export loan guarantee program, to assist these companies in meeting their obligations and putting many Albertans to work.
Member for Edmonton-Calder, followed by the member for Edmonton-Meadowlark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Social Services. On April 10th, the Minister wrote a letter to individuals on AISH requesting detailed information on their assets and shelter costs. The Department indicated that this information is the equivalent of a needs test and is required for cost sharing with the federal government, but that Alberta is not contemplating any kind of compulsory testing which would affect eligibility for AISH. As many people are anxious and uncertain about the intent of this letter to the Minister, could the Minister explain why the letter did not state clearly that this was not compulsory for AISH recipients to provide this information?
Mr. Speaker, I thought that it did make that statement clearly.
Well, many people are confused, Mr. Speaker, about the intent of this letter. Will the minister state unequivocally that this government is not considering a compulsory needs test for AISH recipients?
I'd be pleased to make that unequivocal statement, Mr. Speaker.
Well, that's good to know. The letter stated that the government's intent is to cost share with the federal government. If the government's intent is to maximize CAP funding, which requires needs testing, why is this government pussyfooting and not making this intent clear?
Mr. Speaker, I thought that we had, or that I had made the intent clear, but I'm pleased that the honourable member has provided me with the opportunity to make it clear in the House.
To the minister, a supplementary. Will the minister state unequivocally that in providing the information as requested in the form, that AISH recipients will in no way be restricted in their eligibility and the level of their benefits now or in the future?
Mr. Speaker, I can certainly make that statement, and just for further clarification, in the event that other honourable members have had this raised with them by constituents, I think it is well known that Alberta's program is basically income tested and not needs tested. And we certainly didn't want to go back to what most of the other provinces have, and that is a form of social allowance. We want to be able to continue to deliver a pension to our severely handicapped people. But it is also true that our criteria for that pension does not match the federal CAP program. And so my request of individuals on the pension was that if they could provide additional information, that in many cases we believe that it would show that these people indeed would have been eligible for social allowance had we had that program in place instead of the pension. And I would share that information with the federal government in order to receive some cost sharing, but in no way would that affect their eligibility for the pension.
Supplementary, Edmonton Goldbar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again to the minister. Will the minister tell the House precisely which items in the request letter that went out to AISH recipients are specifically and directly required in order to secure CAP funding, and which are items only required for the department's own use?
Mr. Speaker, while I don't have the specifics in front of me, I think that the principle is that it is the area that goes beyond the needs test that is normally in place for social allowance recipients, that as far as the federal government is concerned, because we don't address that area, that we run afoul of the CAP regulations.
Edmonton Meadowlark, followed by the member for Red Deer South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Premier. Last year, Quebec made its 5 constitutional proposals public, with the 2 key proposals being a veto and the recognition of Quebec as a distinct society. Recently, in preparation for this week's First Ministers' meeting on Quebec, the Prime Minister issued to the Premiers his proposal for a solution. To the Premier, would the Premier consider providing Quebec with a veto or recognition of a distinct society as a quid pro quo for a Triple E Senate?
No, Mr. Speaker.
Great. Leaving one to wonder what is the negotiating strategy to get a Triple E Senate. Has the Premier received any indication that other provinces are supportive of this kind of trade-off?
Would the honourable member rephrase that so it made a little more clarity, more sense?
That may be difficult. Still my second question, Mr. Speaker, has the Premier got some form of negotiating strategy that would allow us to bend on some issues in order to achieve success in the Triple E Senate? Because as it stands now, there seems to be no concerted effort or negotiating strategy to achieve something that will be as difficult to achieve as the Triple E Senate. Is that clear?
Yes, we do, Mr. Speaker.
Has the Premier received any indication from Quebec that their 5 proposals are all or nothing, and if so, will you be telling Quebec that it's the Triple E Senate or nothing?
No, Mr. Speaker.
Therefore, to the Premier, what leverage could we possibly have to get the Triple E Senate once we accede to Quebec's demands for constitutional change? Where will we get the leverage? Why would they give us something once they've got what they want, and once the federal government has what it wants as well in that regard?
Mr. Speaker, obviously the Constitutional Conference that's coming up on April the 30th will be a time when all of these matters will be discussed. I don't know how to express on behalf of the province of Quebec a position today, because they will be presenting it at that meeting.
Member for Red Deer South, followed by the member for Vegreville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Solicitor General. With the growing popularity of all-terrain vehicles, and in particular three-wheel all-terrain vehicles, the public is seeing a large increase in the number of injuries and fatalities, 20% of whom are children under the age of 12. My question to the Minister is this: what steps has the Minister taken to determine what safety problems exist with children riding all-terrain vehicles, and would he inform the House on what those problems might be?
Mr. Speaker, the all-terrain vehicles are one type of vehicle under the Off-Highway Vehicle Act, and there's a requirement that children under 14 be accompanied by an adult or have one in close proximity thereto when giving instructions on these vehicles. And this pertains to public land. If these vehicles are operated on private land, the Act doesn't pertain. I have, as the member from Red Deer South has, a concern over the number of injuries. However, most of those injuries occur from youngsters utilizing these vehicles in conditions where they shouldn't and at an age limit when they shouldn't, and the majority are in private land where I don't think the government should interfere with regulation. It's a parental responsibility.
Supplementary. To the Solicitor General, could the Minister tell the Assembly why all-terrain vehicle riders are not required to wear helmets?
Mr. Speaker, the member for Red Deer South is correct. There is no requirement in the Off-Highway Vehicle Act for wearing a vehicle, whether you're operating the vehicle on public or private land. This is an inconsistency, and if it was felt that wearing a helmet on public land, for the very few instances where this would happen, again reiterating that private land is not someplace this Act has jurisdiction, I would be willing to bring such a proposal to my caucus colleagues and see whether it has merit. Most of the injuries, I might point out, are not of the head injury. They are from appendages or trunk injuries, and I'm not so sure that in these small instances we would be able to overcome the injuries by wearing helmets.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, again to the Solicitor General. Would he tell the House what policy he has developed regarding safety devices, training, and engine displacements for all-terrain vehicles, and if he has none, why not?
Perhaps I could answer it easily. I have none. The why not is because the All-Terrain Vehicle Council sets up industry standards, and I don't think it's a place for us to second-guess whether their standards are accurate or adequate. And the other issue is, again, the control of the operator in operating the vehicle as to whether they're operating it correctly. And that, I think, again, is a parentable response. I might mention that there is a Canadian All-Terrain Council that does establish a training course for people who purchase such vehicles. It has a number of government departments on it. They have a program for training, and I would suggest anyone buying one of these vehicles take this course.
Thank you. Final supplementary, Mr. Speaker, again to the Solicitor General. Can he advise us what action that he has taken to improve all-terrain vehicle safety so that fewer youth will be injured? And if he has not yet taken any action, when can Albertans expect such action to take place?
Mr. Speaker, I repeat that I don't think that this is an area that the government necessarily should get involved in where vehicles are being operated on private land. Although this type of vehicle has been around for approximately 10 to 15 years and there hasn't been any changes in legislation, I would undertake to review what is happening in other provinces in this industry and see if there is some initiative that could be taken.
Final supplementary, Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, to the Solicitor General, could he tell the House whether or not the Department is considering any regulations or changes in regulation that would preclude the use of these vehicles and snowmobiles up and down the ditches of the main road allowances? They seem to enjoy the hazard or the lumps and bumps that the Highways Department put in for use along the road allowance. Is he considering any changes in those regulations?
Mr. Speaker, the present regulation is that if you're operating it on public land, you must be licensed and must meet the requirements of being 14 years or over. If you're over 14, you must have a learner's permit. A municipality could pass a bylaw to allow them to cross on some road under their particular jurisdiction. There's no change other than that.
Member for Vegreville, followed by the member for Edmonton Highlands, if there is time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Agriculture, he refers to it as the Pay the Producer pilot project, while others call it the planche patronage position. I will, from this point on, refer to it for more than one reason as the Peter principle, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister advise the Assembly whether it is the view of this government that the Crow benefit, $658 million paid to the railways, originally established as a transportation subsidy, is now viewed by this government as a production subsidy?
Mr. Speaker, we, unlike the honourable member, don't believe it is a direct subsidy, and that's why we wish to have it paid directly to the producer rather than to the railway. And it's interesting to note in his report that he just tabled in the Legislative Assembly, he's against as many things as he is for, because I notice again he is against paying the producer the Crow benefit. He's against incentive rates within the province of Alberta, which will have a direct and substantial positive impact for his constituency of Vegreville. Mr. Speaker, all they are is against and against and against, whereby we want to use innovative approaches to make sure that our agricultural sector is successful.
What I'm against is this government, Mr. Speaker. The Minister uses a pretty alluring description to describe the Crow benefit and his desire to pay the producers instead of the railways. It's a noble cause, Mr. Speaker, but will the Minister of Agriculture admit in this Assembly that what he's really attempting to do is, instead of the federal government paying the railways the $21 a ton subsidy, he wants export grain producers to pay the railways that $21 a ton subsidy at the time of delivery?
No, Mr. Speaker. What we want to do is allow the farmer the opportunity to decide which is the most efficient means of transportation, unlike the New Democratic Party that believes they should dictate everything to our citizens within this province. We want to allow individual citizens that opportunity to decide for themselves. And Mr. Speaker, I must say, I find it so disheartening when I see the opposition parties laughing at the serious problems that agriculture is facing.
Recognizing, Mr. Speaker, that the Minister's proposal will reduce the initial value of grain by $21 a ton, how can he justify advancing this position at a time when prices have dropped an average of 18% again last week?
Mr. Speaker, because what it would mean is we would have secondary industry, we would have a greater input into the livestock sector within this province, whereby there would be greater means for disposal of our grain products within this province of Alberta. It's something that we've indicated, and a number of very important sectorial groups have indicated that also. Unfortunately, it hasn't sunk in yet to the New Democratic Party, the positive benefits it would have in this province as it relates not only to our livestock sector, the grain sector, and secondary industry.
Final supplementary, Vegreville.
Has the Minister done any calculations to determine what effect the dilution of this benefit would be if it's paid to producers sometime in the future instead of paid to railways at the time of delivery?
Yes, we have, Mr. Speaker, but we believe that the increased efficiencies will pick up, if not all of that, close to all of that dilution, which would account for anywhere from 5 to 15%.
The Westlock Sturgeon.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, to the supplementary to the Minister of Agriculture with respect to the subsidy or the producer subsidy, would the minister consider, as now probably is aware, the barley producers and a few others access it for cattle feeding? However, the hay producers are not qualifying for this producer subsidy. Is there any consideration in his mind that all feeds be treated equally for this thing, and there would be some sort of assistance given to the hay producers, those that produce hay to feed?
Mr. Speaker, I have the letter from the honourable member, and I'm presently in the process of answering it, whereby he raised that concern with me. I wish, and hopefully with further and proper explanation, it will sink into both the Liberal and the New Democratic Party that it is not a subsidy. Our program is an offset to what we consider is a discriminatory payment to the railways rather than to the producer. We instituted the offset to offset what we consider, as the honourable member for economic development is so very much aware and might wish to supplement, what we consider a very discriminatory payment, because it is going to have a substantial impact in this province in the event that we can have that method of payment changed. Because it is an offset and it relates to those products that do receive the CRO benefit, we have it only applicable to those products, and hay is not one of those products.
May we have unanimous consent to finish this line of questioning if there are any additional supplementaries? Yeah. Opposed? Any additional supplementaries? Before we come to orders of the day, I'm sure that all honourable members will join with me in welcoming the honourable member for Chinook back after his valiant battle with things medical. Orders of the day.
Rise to request.